and innovation.
Climate Champion, the forums brought together representatives from governments, international, regional, and national financial institutions, and the private sector investments with the aim of accelerating public and private invest in concrete projects in climate mitigation and adaptation in line with the SDGs. The outcome of these forums were presented at COP27. We are keen to follow up on these outcomes with the aim of translating project pipelines from the concept phase through to investment readiness and implementation. Furthermore, we are looking forward together with our partners in this initiative to convening the second edition of the regional forums next year. I would like to seize this opportunity to thank high-level champions of COP26 and COP27, Mr. Nigel Topping and Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, for all their efforts in encouraging and mobilizing actions from non-state actors. I am confident that the high-level champions for COP27 and COP28 shall build upon and push forward the existing incentive level of dialogue and practical interaction with all non-state actors, the globe, to enhance the positive contribution to global climate action. I thank you. I would like to invite the master of the ceremony, Ms. Omneya Omrani, the COP27 Youth Envoy, who will lead us into the second session of the event, moving to the non-parties side. Ms. Omneya Omrani, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellencies. It's such an honor to be with you today and to begin the second part of the high-level event on the global climate action. And first of all, I would like to share that this important event has demonstrated the ambition and the energy of the non-state actors working collectively and charting a path towards the global climate goals. And this 2 weeks has demonstrated how each and every event at the action zone showed the ambition as well as the needs of the communities, health, food, and most importantly, the voices of children and youth, with the very first ever Children and Youth Pavilion, which is the first time in the history of COPs, and at the same time, it showed the importance of the voices of the leaders of today and tomorrow. We say that this COP is the implementation COP, and we have seen such evidence of progress demonstrated by the actions coming from the business, the finance, cities, and civil society organizations. Finally, I would like to showcase the closing moment of this part of the agenda with the key highlights coming from the last 2 weeks of the Global Climate Action events. Now let's take a look at it together. So I hope that you feel as inspired as I am. And I would like to introduce the moderator of the next segment. the former President of Ireland, the Paladin for Human Rights and Climate Justice, a very special youth ally, and the Chair of the Elders, Mary Robinson. I'd like to welcome you to the floor.
Thank you very much, Omnia. All protocols observed. I am delighted to be here for this session because it's a session that I think is going to lift our hearts. We know there's been a great deal of discussion here as we come towards the end of COP27, of knowledge sharing, of commitment making. But for this session, we want to cast our minds to the future. What if our best times are still ahead of us? Can we get our heads around that and see how that would shape up? And if we can get our heads around it, why don't we talk about it more? You know, that's a question we should ask ourselves. We should be rushing to this future, but we don't talk about it enough. A future, of course, of clean energy, of regeneration, of, you know, bringing back more biological diversity, preventing extinction of species, etc. And I have a wonderful panel of, I'm glad to say, 3 women. Ah, I like that. Yeah, there'll be too many men around, you know. I like that. And I'm going to invite them one by one, and they're going to go to the podium, and they're going to tell their vision for the future, very briefly, and then they'll join me here. And when the 3 of us are sitting, we'll take up that further conversation. So please join me in welcoming the first, the environmental activist from Ecuador, Helena Gualinga.
Hello, can you hear me?
Go ahead, Helena.
Hello? Okay. Thank you, Mary, for introducing me. My vision of the future is of my community, the Quechua people of Sarayaku in the Ecuadorian Amazon. When I was a child, I ran barefoot between the tall samauma trees with a monkey on my head. Back then, I did not imagine a world where children in the Amazon are being poisoned by oil and mercury, where I fear my home might at any point be washed away by massive floods, where every day I fear that one of my friends or relatives might be killed for protecting our home, the living forest. I did not envision a world where we, the youth, are left to deal with the consequences of the irresponsibility of the adults and the so-called world leaders. I envision a future where we do not have to fear another flood, another typhoon, another fire, or fear finding another murdered protector of the Amazon. I envision a world where the children, your children, our children, do not have to fight for the future of humanity. I envision the living forest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helena. And now I'm going to call on our second wonderful woman, the mayor of Lusaka, Chilando Chitangala. And I want her to share a snapshot of the future that she envisaged. So, Chilando?
Good evening. Good evening, thank you. I would like to share our future vision for our city, Lusaka, in the future now. The youths of Lusaka will have taken up the mantle to create jobs through the opportunities of the transition to the green economy, with recycling skills and also innovations. Women and communities are coming together to create a cleaner and more resilient city and benefiting from the opportunities that transition offers. The key to emancipation of women and young people has been turned by addressing the challenges presented by the crisis of climate now. Trust has been built with all people coming together. The city is growing and developing in a harmony with surroundings and respect of nature. We would like to see a clean, green, and healthy city with equal opportunities for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chalando. And now please join me in welcoming the CEO of the Climate Smart Accelerator, Raquel Moses, to share her vision.
Hello. 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 Yes, can you hear me? Wonderful. So my vision for the future is of hurricanes, floods, and wildfires. A hurricane of collaboration towards the creation of a net export of green hydrogen in the Caribbean, where we are not just collaborating towards the achievement of our goal of 90% renewable energy, but where we create a net export of green hydrogen towards supporting our tourism industry and creating a new opportunity out of this climate crisis. A flood of entrepreneurship, so that we are thinking about how are we creating new solutions that help to not just how do we avoid putting more carbon in the atmosphere, but how do we create solutions that absorb carbon, like using the remediation of plastic to improve our built environment and creating a better future for all that's more circular, more inclusive, that creates new jobs for Caribbean people. And finally, a wildfire of innovation. A wildfire of innovation towards new biodiversity, creating new solutions, creating a blue carbon exchange, and using that market to fund our climate adaptation. The future that I envision is one where my daughters have limitless possibilities, limitless access to opportunities, and that we share this beautiful future in our Caribbean home, where we're exporting solutions to the developed world and sharing the beauty that we experience every day. Thank you.
Well, now you've heard these three visions from these three wonderful women who are going to help me on this discussion, and I want to share with you where I got my own inspiration from. I got it from an Indigenous woman who was part of a women leaders network that I was involved in, and she said, her name is Jade Bigo. She's actually here at the COP. She's responsible, in fact, for the Indigenous pavilion. She's provided it. It's a lovely pavilion. And Jade said they have a saying in her tribe in New Mexico: what if our best days are still ahead of us? Our best times, are still ahead of us. And the truth is they are. But unfortunately, so are our worst times. And that's where we're heading. It doesn't seem very clever, does it? But it shows that we have a choice. We can either choose our best times, and I heard a lot of discussion about best times at this COP, and coalitions about best times, and commitments about best times at this COP. But unfortunately, because we haven't got the commitment yet to reduce the emissions by 45% in the next 45 degrees in the next 45% in the next 7 years, because it'll be 7 years to 2030. We're not on course. It's a hump, really, that we have to get over. So I'm going to come back to all three of you, and I'll begin with you, Raquel, because you talked about how do we create solutions. Now tell me about some of these solutions that you yourself feel you can be creating or you've seen created here at the COP.
The reality is the vision that I envision for the future isn't something that is, some sort of future state that we have to start. All of these things have started. We are already collaborating towards a clean energy export of green hydrogen to cover the last mile of decarbonization of many of these hard-to-abate sectors. We are already using plastic waste to turn that into strengthening concrete and improving our built environment. We're already seeing entrepreneurship taking things like sargassum, which the heating of the ocean is creating, and using that to create other solutions. So all of the things that we envision, it's not like an arm's length, like we don't know how we're going to get there. The challenge that we're having is that we just need to get there fast enough, and we need more support. But I'm a firm believer that the things that we focus on are the things that manifest. And if we don't start talking about the vision of the future that we're working towards versus the vision of the future that we're trying to avoid, we will inadvertently find ourselves heading towards the future that we're trying to avoid. Focus on the positives. Focus on the things that we can get done. Focus on the innovation. Focus on the youth and the new solutions. The future can be so much more beautiful than anything we would have experienced in the past. And we have to start thinking about where are we going and just stay laser focused on getting there.
Yes, could you pass the mic to Chilanda? Chilanda, you're the mayor of the city of Lusaka. What have mayors been talking about at this conference? What is the future that mayors see, and what are you doing about it?
Thank you. First of all, it's been nice to come to COP so that we learn what other cities are doing and what they are achieving. But for our city, what we've done is there's been a lot of stakeholder collaboration with other actors and community participation and engagement. And I think because we've been doing that, the people that are on the ground at the lower level take part in the policies and whatever we are doing. So they own the transition. They own it, and that has been good for us. For example, we are already engaging them, and they're taking part in action, climate action, environmental protection. And for environmental protection, we're planting trees with them, protecting our recharge areas. We're burying shallow wells. They are made because 70% of the city of Lusaka is peri-urban, and we live in unplanned settlement, informal settlement. So it means that they use shallow wells for drinking water. So we have to make them understand that we have to move away from that. Yeah. And then also strengthening partnerships. We're strengthening partnership with stakeholders. And also what we're doing is resource mobilization and implementation. Also improved governance through decentralization. So we're doing all that together as a city, and it's working.
And have you formed any new kind of useful partnerships or learning here at the COP that you can bring back to Lusaka?
Yes, we have, but obviously I've also told other cities what I've done. For example, I have what I call a junior mayor, a junior council, and other cities, we're happy to hear about it. And that's what I've been using for the youths to communicate. But I've also learned from other cities what they're doing. Yeah. Yes, and I think that is good for my city too. Yeah.
Thank you. Helena, I know this is a difficult conversation, I think, for you, because I want to recall our meeting in COP26. I got a message about the anger of indigenous women in the Amazon, that they had come so far to Glasgow and they weren't being heard. And would some of us women leaders provide them with a bit of space? And the first thing I was able to do was provide an opportunity for you to be on Sky Television. And you spoke beautifully about the problems of the Amazon. You're from Ecuador, part of the Amazon. And then we listened to other very angry women. I'd say they're probably still pretty angry. So I'm not going to ask you to be too rosy, because that's not right. I want you to tell us at the same time how you can see a better future, okay?
Yes, I remember meeting you last year. I think that for too long, Indigenous people have been completely invisibilized when it comes to climate politics. We don't realize that most of the forests and ecosystems that are still left on this planet, they are under Indigenous people's protection. And what I was talking about earlier, we're every day seeing Indigenous people all over the world and in the Amazon being murdered for this work. And there's complete silence on it in the international community, because this is something that happens every day. and not just the murders, but when the children are dying, poisoned by oil and mercury, poisoned by the fossil fuel industry, that is causing climate change. And to me, it's completely insane to come here, and we're still talking about that we're going to stop exploiting for oil in the future. It's something that should be completely illegal and criminal, because it's something that's already killing people directly, and it's been doing so for the last 50 years. We're seeing children in the Amazon dying of cancer because they're being polluted by oil. And I think it's even hard for us to imagine a future of hope when this is all we know. But I think from our territories, we also have a lot of beauty in the Amazon. I live in a community that's full of nature. We don't have roads there. We're completely surrounded by pristine rainforest. And we can see that it's possible to continue conserving nature. And when we're talking about solutions, nature needs to be at the heart and center of those solutions. Because if we do not protect these forests, we don't even stand a chance against climate change. Without protecting indigenous people, we do not stand a chance against climate change. But we still have forests, and we still have indigenous people that are committed beyond any type of commitment that there is here. And so there is definitely hope for that, and we can continue doing that.
Thank you. Helena, it's because of your passion and your truth and the fact that indigenous peoples are saving the forests of the world and are the guardians of the seeds and are the hope for a better future if we only understand that we too are nature and make that real. So we have a challenge. As I mentioned, we can get to our best times, and there's a lot of work going on, as Raquel said, but we need to move the other agenda. The fact that we're not getting the commitments by governments to really ensure that we will get to our best future. When I was in Glasgow, I was very disheartened to learn from Climate Action Tracker that we were on course for a 2.4 degree world if every government that had made a pledge in their nationally determined contributions fully implemented that pledge. That's on course for a 2.4 degree world. I'm told by Climate Action Tracker, nothing has changed about that. We're still on course for a 2.4 degree world, which is not a livable world. We have to understand that. The more we go in through this century and see the climate shocks that are already affecting the world, north and south, the northern hemisphere has more recently had these shocks. The southern hemisphere has been having them for a long time. So I think we need to be in what I call moonshot time. And I explored with some women leaders, John F.
And the UNFCCC, we discussed extensively the current state of negotiations at COP27. While progress has been achieved on a large number of issues, it is evidently clear that at this late stage of the COP27 process, there are still a number of issues where progress remains lacking, with persisting divergent views amongst parties. On the 7th and 8th of November, world leaders descended on this venue and expressed unequivocal support to the global effort to tackle climate change and adapt to its impacts, reaffirming their countries' steadfast commitment and heightened political will to the issue, and making pledges and further commitments to enhance the climate response. This political will needs to find its way fully to the negotiating rooms. Yesterday and today, I have been attending the consultations amongst parties and have been actively involved in direct discussions with all parties on the various issues under consideration. While some of the discussions were constructive and positive, others did not reflect the expected recognition of the need to move collectively to address the gravity and urgency of the climate crisis. The mitigation work program is yet to reach the desired outcome. Adaptation is still held back by procedural matters. Ambitious outcomes on finance have not yet materialized. And on loss and damage, parties are shying away from taking the difficult political decisions. The Secretary General and I discussed at length the current status of matters relating to funding arrangements, responding to loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change. I believe that extra efforts need to be exerted by all parties to ensure an agreement on this matter, one that would provide a basis that would allow us to effectively respond to the urgent and legitimate demand for an adequate funding setup for loss and damage at the earliest. We underscored the urgency of the ongoing climate crisis. I reiterated what was highlighted by His Excellency President el-Sisi at the opening ceremony of the Climate Implementation Summit on November the 7th. And I quote, "The world has become a stage for continuously running show of human misery and pain. This needs to end now, not tomorrow." On our part, the COP27 presidency is working around the clock and with the facilitating ministers to ensure a timely conclusion of all issues at hand. I urge all parties to go the extra mile, to take the necessary steps to reach the much-needed conclusions and agreements. The world is waiting for us to demonstrate the seriousness by which we tackle this matter, and as a community of nations, we must live up to their expectations. I thank you.
Your Excellency and dear friend Samir Shukri, I'm here to fully support the Egyptian presidency to achieve a success, an ambitious result in COP27. I'm just off a plane from the G20 meeting in Bali, and I've been briefed by the COP27 president, and I thank you for his detailed description of the present situation. We are at crunch time in the negotiations. COP27 is scheduled to close in 24 hours, and the parties remain divided on a number of significant issues, as it was referred. There has been clearly, in the past times, a breakdown in trust between North and South and between developed and emerging economies. But this is no time for finger-pointing. The blame game is a recipe for mutually assured destruction. I'm here to appeal to all parties to rise to this moment and to the greatest challenge that humanity is facing. The world is watching, and there's a simple message to all of us: stand and deliver. Deliver the kind of meaningful climate action that people and planet so desperately need. Global emissions are at their highest level in history and rising. Climate impacts are decimating economies and societies and growing. And we know what we need to do, and we have the tools and the resources to get it done. And so I appeal to the parties to act in three critical areas. First, the most effective way to rebuild trust is by finding an ambitious and credible agreement on loss and damage and financial support to developing countries. The time for talking on loss and damage finance is over. We need action. No one can deny the scale of loss and damage we see around the globe. The world is burning and drowning before our eyes. I urge all parties to show that they see it and get it. Send a clear signal that the voices of those on the front lines of the crisis are finally being heard. Reflect the urgency, scale, and enormity of the challenge faced by so many developing countries. We cannot continue to deny climate justice to those who have contributed least to the climate crisis and are getting hurt the most. Now is a moment for solidarity. Second, I appeal to all parties to forcefully address the huge emissions gap. The 1.5 target is not simply about keeping a goal alive, it's about keeping people alive. I see the will to keep to the 1.5 goal, but we must ensure that commitment is evident in the COP27 outcome. Fossil fuel expansion is hijacking humanity. Any hope of meeting the 1.5 target requires a step change in emissions reductions. We cannot close the emissions gap without an acceleration in the deployment of renewables. The Just Energy Transition Partnerships are important pathways to accelerate the phasing out of coal and the scaling up of renewables. But this effort must be expanded. More broadly, we need to keep pushing for a climate solidarity pact, a pact with developed countries taking the lead in reducing emissions, and a pact to mobilize, together with international financial institutions and the private sector, financial and technical support for emerging economies to accelerate their transition to renewable energy. This is essential to keep the 1.5-degree goal within reach. Renewables are the exit ramp from the climate hell highway. Third, the parties must act on the crucial question of finance. That means delivery of the $100 billion in climate finance for developing countries, clarity on how the doubling of adaptation finance will be delivered through a credible roadmap, and it means acting on the consensus to reform multilateral development banks and international financial institutions. Their business model needs to change to accept more risk and to systematically leverage private finance for developing countries at reasonable cost for climate action. They must provide the support developing countries need to embark on a renewable energy and climate-resilient pathway. Dear members of the media, we must have agreed solutions in front of us to respond to loss and damage, to close the emissions gap, and to deliver on finance. The climate clock is ticking, and trust keeps eroding. The parties at COP27 have a chance to make a difference here and now, and I urge them to act, and act quickly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shukran.
Of green ports. How do we decarbonize the maritime industry? How do we decarbonize the aviation industry? You know, and there are, that conversation can't take place without the private sector. And they're the ones who are going to seek economic opportunities in this transition. And back to your point, Helena, I absolutely agree. We need a complete reformation of how we think about these things. And it requires that we have more women in leadership and more equity and more justice. And that will help us to bridge those gaps and think about things in a completely transformed way that will lead to these outcomes that we're seeking.
Chalando, do you think the voice of cities is heard enough at these COPs? You know, the voice of mayors like you?
Unfortunately, I'll say not really. Because time and again we've been talking about the same thing over and over, and then I think it's been very unfortunate because the same things that we've talked about in other summits, other conferences are the same things that we're talking about even at this COP. So I hope that from now onwards, the future will have a new story, because where we are at now, that's not where we should be in the next 7 years. So I hope the story will change, because we need a lot of support as cities. And they must take note, like I said, support the cities directly, because we are the ones that take care of you, the people. Thank you.
Helena, I think I have to ask you, what is the cover decision you want to see coming out of here? What should it include coming out of COP27? Write it for me.
That's big. I think that right now this COP is a COP that should have happened 30 years ago, right? When the island nations started to bring up loss and damage, that's a conversation that should have been held 30 years ago. We're 30 years late on climate action. So what I want to see that there is responsibility taken, the historic responsibility is taken here, and that there is reparation, not just compensation, but that there is a reparation for those countries that have been suffering from climate change. And we need to stop delaying the date when we end fossil fuel, when we stop using fossil fuel. And I think we've been delaying it for too long. So I hope it's from the bottom of my heart that we can realize that that was something that should have been done yesterday.
Let's talk about phasing down not just coal, but oil and gas. Yes. Would you like to see that expressly in the cover decision?
Yes.
Good. Anything else?
Okay.
Anything else? Anything else?
A lot else.
Michael.
Yeah. I think also we need to recognize the importance of indigenous people in these conversations. We've been also left out for too long, and that's also what has delayed the conversation. That's what it has taken 30 years to come to get to this COP. So let's we're really, really hoping for good outcomes of COP27.
I'm glad that we could talk about the future, but also talk about responsibility and talk about what has not happened and talk about, because both are relevant to this COP. We have to imagine more this future that's around the corner if we get over the hump, and it's an important hump and it's a responsibility hump, of getting the world into clean energy. Think of the difference that would make to this continent. Imagine if the 600 million who never switch the switch for electricity, the 900 million who still cook on dirty cooking, can have their clean cooking. Imagine the difference it would make to the women involved in particular, their time, etc. Imagine, keep on imagining, because we've got to make it happen. Thank you, please. Please thank our great panel here, and keep imagining.
Thank you so much, Mary, and all the other panelists for such an insightful and a very powerful discussion. And now I would like to invite our high-level champions to share their key takeaways from the last 2 weeks. But first of all, join me in welcoming His Excellency, Dr. Mahmoud Mohiuddin, who's going to share with us what has been done, what is still yet to go, and what we are hoping in the journey to COP28.
Thank you very much, Omnia, for this introduction. President Robinson, Excellencies, Ambassador Ayman Sarwat, all protocols observed. I enjoyed very much the discussion earlier, to the extent that I wanted to change my talking points again. But this is not possible at this stage. But let me share some reflections on what was said. And as I liked the questions, I liked as well the very specific answers to the questions on the expectations, on what's needed really to have another moonshot. And it's a great lesson from history and the leadership of President Kennedy. We have more finance than in the 1960s. We have better knowledge, research and development, definitely more than 1960s. But there is something that is very much missing, which is reflected in the words of the Secretary General, as we are suffering from a deficit in trust because of lack of leadership, and what we require more in order to invest in behavioral change where it matters. While finance is a constraint, science is available but it's not shared. But what could really facilitate our pathways towards climate action, effective implementation for the measure that we all agree on, is basically the bridging of a bigger gap than the gap in finance, which is requiring change in behavior. So it looks like a couple of hours passed since I addressed with Nigel this gathering, but it was basically on the opening event, making good on promises. I asked then what is inefficient, insufficient, and unfair. At the time, I was talking about climate and development finance, but I could have been talking about the current state of climate action at large, across the board, about all the promises that have been left unfulfilled. There is still a long way left to go, but I'm pleased to say that there have been positive developments and signals in the last 2 weeks here in Sharm el-Sheikh. With the support of the Secretariat, the Marrakesh Partnership, the Climate Action Community, and the Climate Champions team, we have made progress on several fronts that can take hours to reflect on you. There is long version, short version. There is an executive summary that you can check, and there is the long version of it that is available on the website. But I'll give some quick summaries of what had been achieved so far and how can we build on that further for the future, the near future. For the first time at the COP, we put youth at the heart of climate action with the launch of the Children and Youth Pavilion. But before that, there was a very good decision by the presidency of the COP to have the first ever youth envoy. And where is Ummea here? Is still, or she disappeared now? So, yeah, so that was a very great choice, and I'm happy that Egypt had this introduction that I think it will be followed in the future. There was something else that we focused not just on the very able youth that are not just coming with complaints but solutions for the future, including children, through the collaboration of the Climate Champions team and the presidency of the COP. We invited 7 children from around the world, and many of them, actually I would say all of them, inspired us, and they are coming with their solutions. Knowledge sharing, ideas to develop the knowledge, iPod, work, podcasting, applications, and doing more with communities and developing applications for practical issues of big concern, especially in underprivileged areas. For the first time as well, at the COP, in close partnership with the presidency of the COP, under the call for action, together for implementation, we put adaptation action at the forefront of the launch of the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda. This adaptation agenda is the first comprehensive global plan to rally both states and non-state actors behind a shared set of 30 adaptation outcomes, 5 impact systems to work on: food and agriculture, water and nature, coastal and oceans areas, human settlements and infrastructure, and including enabling solutions for planning and finance. This agenda is a powerful joint effort with the presidency to focus on near-term adaptation. In a brief discussion with the president of the COP, they are expecting as a team and as presidency actions, and this is what will happen starting next week, what will be the areas of work, including projectizing many of these areas of work going forward and reporting regularly on them. For the first time as well at COP, we brought together a global pipeline of implementable, financeable, and investable projects. I didn't mention bankable because we are too much dependent on debt instruments. We cannot be more indebted than what we are today. So the idea is to partner with investors, long-term finance, in order to unlock climate finance through a massive mobilization of private and public finance for climate action solutions. Mitigation is getting some decent traction in some areas, but not across the board. But definitely we need to work more on adaptation and resilience. We cannot be stopping at the 2% share of climate finance as part of global finance. This needs to change. This needs regulations, better design of projects, better incentives, and better partnerships. And we're working on that. Our new report, Assets to Flows, shows what it will take to convert financial assets into flows, derived from our series of regional finance forum. This was a very important initiative, and I'm happy with the partnership with the UN system, with the regional economic commissions, with the presidency of COP27, and for my good friend as well, Mark Carney, because he put this strong question to many of us. We have the funds, can we see the pipeline of projects? And that got us very active to mobilize a list of investable projects, and we presented a number of them here at the COP through a compendium of projects covering mitigation, adaptation, possibilities of engagement in addition to public-private partnership with impact on local communities, and managing as well a transition that should be just when we are working on that. We put Africa and the Africans at the center of COP, and I really commend the work of the African leaders when they considered an implementation COP to be an African COP. So this is basically a COP for all of the world, but for Africans to benefit from it, it should be focusing on implementation and to push the action agenda further. So very specific areas of work here. I'm very proud of the work of the team on this area of work. I'm happy to see the head of the Financial Regulatory Authority with us as well, because the first actionable approach that we introduced with the establishment of the first Africa carbon market through the Africa Carbon Markets Initiative by the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, Sustainable Energy for All, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and many other partners from the regulatory agencies, private sector, and we launched that initiative in the presence of 4 heads of state and more than 12 ministers and many private sector participants. The Africa Climate Risk Facility is an initiative of the Nairobi Declaration on Sustainable Insurance. It has now more than $14 billion of cover for climate risk by 2030. It's the first time ever that signatories have made this financial commitment, and this will benefit the Africans focusing on adaptation, benefiting from a data set that will be built even further through good utilization of the data that will come from the early warning system that had been advanced and initiated by the UN system after the good call by the Secretary General of the United Nations on this front. Local initiatives. We launched an unprecedented local initiative under the auspices of the President of Egypt, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, offering an example to be replicated, hopefully, regionally and internationally in future COPs. It's about localization of climate action. And if I answered a global figure with my team and Nigel, of course, who happened to be Mark Carney in the first question, but actually that question came from a fellow villager from the Egyptian Delta, wondering why we have this COP. What's in it for us to have climate action? So I'm happy that we had an initiative that included 27 governors, 7 ministers, prime minister coordinating the work. So it got the whole country to respond to this question, what's in it for us? We had 6,281 projects that I consider them as answers to this important question, what's in it for us? I am happy to see the 18 winning projects. We just saw some of them today here in the blue zone and earlier in the green zone. They give us hope. And they are working in all areas